Just your casual video about LAUGHTALE. Don't hate me, but I'm hoping to kick you in the nuts.
Hey YouTube, Joeboy here. So,
as I'm known to do, this theory will build off of the last one that I made, but I'm going to try to make it in a way where you don't actually have to watch the other video first, but I would recommend that. At least the first 35 minutes of it, which is totally not asking too much, yeah? 35 minutes, no big deal. So yeah, link is in the description, but for everybody else who did watch it, within the summary, I'm going to try my best to only include information I didn't include in the original video, so your time will not be wasted. But anyway, here is what you need to know. The theory attempts to tell the story of the character Davy Jones from One Piece, and it relies heavily on the mythology and pop culture of Davy Jones, which is an actual pseudo-historical figure. So the same way that you can compare Loki from One Piece to Loki from Norse mythology or Loki from Marvel, I think that there's already a lot that we could potentially learn about Davy Jones from media. But I would say from this video, the most important connection that we found is that Davy Jones from mythology is supposed to, historians and scholars think, that it relates to the story of Jonah the prophet from the Bible. Jonah was given a command by God to save a city that Jonah considered to be evil. Jonah then ran from God, God caught up, and essentially created circumstances so that Jonah ended up in the belly of a great fish, which is often depicted as a whale. And in One Piece, Rox Dizabek is described as an admirer or a worshipper of Davy Jones. And as we explained in the video, there is already similarities between Rox Dizabek's story and the story of Jonah. Something that I didn't bring up in the video but is pretty persuasive, so I probably should have, is in the most recent chapter of One Piece, we can see Rox Dizabek in the island Hachinosu, or Pirate Island. And the defining characteristic of the island at the time is this rock formation, which is literally described as looking like a fish. Sometime later, it's not entirely clear, they hollowed out this rock and gouged holes in it so that it looked less like a great fish and more like a skull. But today you have Blackbeard, the son of Rox Dizabek, living inside of this pirate skull on Hachinosu. But keeping in mind that it was formerly a great fish, they are literally living inside of the great fish. Jonah also spent 3 days and 3 nights inside the belly of the great fish, and Blackbeard has an association with the number 3. The most obvious of this is his Jolly Roger, which depicts 3 skulls. But of course, Davy back fights also have some relation to Davy Jones, and in Davy back fights, the number 3 is also important. Luffy and crew play the 3-coin game. But eventually we started talking about Usopp. And the reality is, guys, is that Usopp's story in Water 7 in Enies Lobby is 1000% the story of Jonah. There is really no debate. If you ask me the order of events, right, Oda dropped the name Davy Jones first in the Foxy arc, and then in the arc that followed, Water 7, he incorporated elements of Davy Jones's story relating to Jonah with Usopp. So a lot of people are under the impression right now that Davy Jones could have been Joy Boy or a Joy Boy-like figure from the past, but I started to wonder if Davy Jones was originally a crewmate of a guy like Joy Boy. Like Jonah, he defied the commands of his captain. Like Usopp in Water 7, he left the crew. And this actually works with Blackbeard as well, because Blackbeard was a member of the Whitebeard Pirates before he broke their ironclad rule and killed a fellow crewmate and then left the crew. Also, fascinating inversion here between Usopp and Blackbeard, because Blackbeard left the crew because he killed a crewmate, while Usopp left the crew because he thought that Luffy was killing a crewmate. In this case, the Going Merry. And if you really want to get crazy and add another layer to this, Ace also defied his captain, ultimately leaving the Whitebeard Pirates, because he didn't feel like Whitebeard was doing the right thing, enforcing his own rules or laws, that killing a crewmate is a crime. So Ace is just another variation of the story of Jonah. And this interrelates with the point of Davy back fights, which is to steal or retrieve crew members. Davy back fights began in order to get Davy Jones back. Something pointed out to me after the fact that didn't actually make it into the official One Piece translation is that when Robin first talked about Davy Jones, in the Foxy arc, she literally calls him a boatswain, a bosun, or a deck boss, which is a role on a ship and not the captain. And really, the best parallel that we have to this role in the current One Piece story is Usopp, before the Strats acquired a shipwright. Stereotypically, this would be something like a jack of all trades and a master of none, in charge of maintaining the deck and the hull. But anyway, the logic of the theory is that I strongly suspect that Jonah, the story of Jonah, is related to Davy Jones. And we see that Roxy Zebek, who is a follower or worshiper of Davy Jones, also has elements of Jonah in his story already, and it is not done yet. But as Oda wrote Usopp in Water 7 in Enies Lobby immediately after name-dropping this character, I think that there is a lot of clues to Davy Jones from Usopp. So whether this is true or not, I believe that you will be greatly rewarded by envisioning Davy Jones as a character similar to Usopp. This is a really bad timeline where Usopp left the crew and didn't have the ability to return, because he lost his soul to the devil and became a demon. And at least this part of it seems incredibly likely to me, because it's almost essentially what Robin has already told us from the story. The legend of Davy Jones from One Piece is that he was a pirate from long ago who was cursed by a demon. Anyway, I think that's probably what you need to know. So let's take this theory to the next level. So I think from the moment that you realize that Jonah the Prophet is such a huge inspiration for One Piece, the likelihood of finding something inside the belly of a whale increases exponentially. And frankly, we have already seen this in many different forms, but the most obvious of which is Laboon and Crocus. Now you could say, well, because Crocus exists inside Laboon, then this inspiration has kind of already been fulfilled in the story. But if you really want to think too much about it, how and why exactly was Crocus inspired to do what he has done to Laboon? Honestly, this is some crazy technology. Less healing than it is robotics. It's a pretty easy sell that Crocus traveled with Goldie Roger, found One Piece, found LAUGHTALE, and through this knowledge was then inspired with Laboon. So Laboon here is just another clue to the importance of Jonah as an inspiration. So I am literally and actually of the opinion that LAUGHTALE can be found within the belly of a great fish or a whale. And this could also end up being some clever wordplay or a double meaning, because a tale can mean a story, but a tale could also mean a tale of a fish. More on this later. This also happens to be another idea that is heavily substantiated from the story. In the island of Zou, you had a very strange tree called the whale tree, which looked like a whale. And then hidden within the belly of the whale was the treasure of the minks, their road poneglyph. But of course, belly of the whale here is metaphorical because they entered through, you guessed it, the tail. But in actuality, when the Strides found this place, it wasn't just the road poneglyph inside. There also happened to be a person chained to the poneglyph, Raizo the ninja. But the creative decisions that Oda made about this character could potentially be important because Raizo was a ninja, and a ninja in the story of One Piece is this master of deception. So they're sort of very convincing expert liars, similar to Usopp. So there's a whole lot more that justifies this, but I think that it's entirely possible that Davy Jones is still alive as a demon. A demon is supposed to be immortal. Joy Boy sealed Davy Jones away inside LAUGHTALE. It's not a coincidence, in my opinion, that Loki is another character tangentially inspired by Davy Jones, and we find him chained to Treasure Tree Adam. Having multiple characters chained to literal treasure, in my opinion, is not a coincidence. So Davy Jones was a character like Joy Boy's treasure, and is literally a part of the One Piece. Joy Boy was unable to defeat Emu, and was unable to kill his friend Davy Jones, so he chose option C. Protect him, and also protect the world from him. So yeah, once this thought is in your mind, you can go back and reread what Robin has already told us about Davy Jones, and then suddenly, it's like, whoa. Davy Jones was a pirate from long ago who was cursed by a demon and is said to live deep down on the seafloor. Robin continues, that's the legend. Any sunken ships or treasures get locked away in Davy Jones's locker. Davy keeps everything that sinks down to him. They say that Goldie Roger found everything, and you have this mythology with Davy Jones that he has acquired all sunken treasure. I truly believe that Davy Jones's locker, or Davy Jones's prison, is the same place as LAUGHTALE, where we will find the One Piece. But I suppose I want to say this here because I'm not sure where else it's going to fit in. When it comes to, for instance, Loki, right? It was important not just to find the location of Loki, but also to find the location of Loki's keys so that he could be freed. This is another trope that Oda has been pretty liberal with. Like, if you take yourself back to Enies Lobby, they not only needed to find Robin, but they needed to find Robin's keys. Something similar has also happened in Alabasta, in Impel Down, in Fishman Island, in Punk Hazard, as well as Whole Cake Island. And this is just the literal uses of actual keys in the story of One Piece, and not something more symbolic or metaphorical, which might literally be every arc. So a thought that has occurred to me is, this is why Blackbeard desired the Yami Yami no Mi. Aside from the strength of the devil fruit itself, Blackbeard somehow knew that Davy Jones's keys were locked away within Black Hole. As Blackbeard has sort of inherited his father or Rocksteady Zebek's will, and Rocksteady Zebek was a worshipper of Davy Jones, it could be that Blackbeard's entire endgame is to free Davy Jones. Or in other words, to get Davy back, which is also simultaneously symbolic of freeing the devil. This is the dream that has been passed down for generations that Blackbeard has inherited, which would honestly be a crazy plot twist and ironic beyond imagining, because it would make Davy Jones' story very similar to Ace. Basically, there are people that think that Joy Boy did Davy Jones wrong by imprisoning him. These people would be very similar to Ace himself when he ignored Whitebeard's command and pursued Blackbeard for justice. But it would also make them similar to Luffy and the Whitebeard pirates in Marineford trying to get Ace back. It's ironic because in both of these occasions, Blackbeard was the villain. But anyway, I understand that this theory is highly speculative, but at the very least, I think that perhaps keys might be something that we at some point need to find. But to go back to the idea of being within the belly of the great fish, you can peruse the majority of One Piece and find various times that Oda has been clearly inspired by this mythology, including this clue right here, the picture that I'm showing on the screen right now, which comes from Oda's office. But it's important that we're talking about a great fish, right? This is not just inside the belly of the whale. One of the common ways that Oda depicts this is things within the belly of a shark. Also, I tend to think that there's a connection between Hody Jones and Davy Jones, and Hody Jones was a shark fishman. Now maybe the character that is most comparable to a demon without literally being a demon transformed by Emu. And for the fishman on the opposite spectrum of Hody Jones, you have Jimbei, and Jimbei is a whale shark. So basically, the positive way to view this great fish is inside the belly of this joyous whale. And the negative way to view this great fish is inside the belly of this dangerous shark. But yeah, we know that Dr. Vegapunk's technology was inspired by the Ancient Kingdom, and one of the things that he was inspired to create is a mecha shark, which nearly swallowed the Straw Hat ship at the beginning of Egghead. We don't actually get to travel inside of the shark, but we can see that Lilith is behind its eyes, right? So this mecha shark is actually very similar to Laboon. And Lilith also tells us the sort of flaw with this invention is free will, that they can't 100% control the shark, which implies that the shark at some point was literally a shark, the same as Laboon. Also worth pointing out that the MO of this shark is to swallow ships, and if it were to do this a lot, it would be full of treasure. Anyway, another version of this comes from the Thousand Sunny Frankie created Shark Submerge, which is this shark-designed submarine. So this is actually fitting on a number of levels, right? We believe that Davy Jones is located in the bottom of the sea somewhere, and the submarine that the Strats use to travel to the deepest parts of the ocean is designed like a shark, and you travel within its belly. And the last example that I want to throw out to you is again from the Fishman Island arc and Shirahoshi's pet Megalo. For a good chunk of that arc, Shirahoshi, who is the ancient weapon Poseidon and is herself a great treasure, hid within the belly of Megalo. Anyway, I hope the takeaway from all of this, if I've done my job, is you should be fairly well convinced that at some point we will find some great treasure within the belly of a great fish. But Oda is very creative, so while it's commonly interpreted that Jonah was swallowed by a whale, it doesn't have to be the case. We could be talking about some other sea creature. So all of this takes us to Skypiea and the enormous snake, Nola. During a substantial portion of that arc, Luffy was swallowed by Nola and existed within the snake's belly. While there, nobody could sense that he was alive or knew where to find him. Also within the snake's belly, Luffy discovered numerous amounts of ruins from the distant past. I'm just gonna go ahead and leave this here.
Isn't this the strangest cave? I don't know, I just got stuck here and I can't get out. Huh? What do you mean swallowed? A snake?
Who'd you think this stomach belonged to?
Oh, come on, Nami. That hurts. Hi, I'm Usopp.
Is he a jester?
If you didn't catch it, this is basically my theory as a joke in 10 seconds. The Straw Hats will travel inside the belly of a whale, which doesn't have to be a whale, and inside, surprisingly, they'll find a person who is like Usopp. The chances of finding such an on-point clue like this are astronomically low, I just want to tell you that. But yeah, I suppose it's finally time for the theory. We're wondering what exactly this great fish will be like in One Piece. Is it a whale? Is it a shark? Well, guys, keeping in mind Oda's creativity and Nola, I think that this could actually be a dragon. There is a lot of mythology from across the world that a dragon guards the treasure. And in Wano, we had a very low-key plot twist that a dragon is actually a kind of fish. Kaido's devil fruit was a fish fruit, meaning a dragon would be a great fish. So this may or may not blow your mind, right? But the entire story of One Piece is in fact a dragon quest. Dragons are important in some way. Vegapunk bioengineered dragons. The only devil fruit Vegapunk ever created was a copy of the dragon devil fruit. The current gods of the world refer to themselves as celestial dragons. And in the mural that we discover in Elbaf, a dragon is drawn at the top of Treasure Tree Adam. Also, I suppose the mystery of the egg on Gold D. Roger's ship. And if you arrive at this conclusion, there's something incredible that you can suddenly do. We've obviously been heavily using the story of Jonah being swallowed by a great fish. This is something that has influenced One Piece a lot. But if the great fish is actually a dragon, suddenly you can incorporate dragon lore into the lore of the One Piece. But on a surface level, you get two distinct interpretations, and this tends to be separated by Eastern and Western dragon mythology. In Eastern mythology, dragons tend to be benevolent and powerful beings that you want to befriend. To fulfill the dragon quest, you have to be worthy. However, in Western mythology, the entire quest leads to the dragon, which you must slay in order to acquire its treasure. So always bear in mind that the story of One Piece is based on the monomyth, or the quintessential hero's journey. The idea that all of the mythologies of the real world all relate to one another. I believe that there are two ways to acquire the One Piece treasure. One of these paths is being taken by Luffy, and the other path is being taken by Blackbeard. Prove yourself worthy, and the dragon will give you your treasure. Something that should immediately come to mind that we know that has inspired Oda is Dragon Ball. If you find all 7 Dragon Balls, you can make a wish. In One Piece, if you find the 4 road poneglyphs, you can find the dragon, and potentially other things are needed as well, but at the end you get the treasure. Similar to granting wishes, if you find the One Piece, it will probably fulfill your dreams. But the other way that you can acquire the One Piece is by slaying the dragon, which I believe Blackbeard intends to do, because he will not prove himself worthy. But yeah, an additional inspiration that we talked about in the prior video is the story of Moby Dick. Blackbeard is similar to Captain Ahab. But anyway, if you're following the theory, I think that we can now specifically use lore related to dragons and relate it to finding the One Piece. So first things first, there's a million different stories that you can look at where at the end you need to slay the dragon. But 2 stories I want to highlight are the stories of Hercules, Ladon, and Hesperides, as well as Jason and the Golden Fleece. Jason is tasked with retrieving the Golden Fleece, which is guarded by a dragon, sometimes described as a serpent in the sacred grove of Ares. Ares was the god of war. In the story of Jason, you find the dragon in the sacred grove. All of this reminds me of the Sabaody mangrove located below Mary Joie and above Fishman Island. And in the myth of Hercules' 11th labor, Hercules must steal golden apples from the garden of Hesperides, guarded by the dragon Ladon. We talked about this more in the prior video and less here, but a story which might relate to the Garden of Eden is very fitting. However, my interpretation of all of this is that this dragon is actually an Eastern dragon, and is more good than it is evil, although you can slay it, if it doesn't give you what you want. So this leads us into some Chinese mythology of Yu the Great. So in Chinese mythology, Yu the Great, a legendary hero, tames floods with the aid of dragons, but faces trials to prove his worthiness. Yu must travel through treacherous flood-ravaged lands, facing natural obstacles and divine challenges. In some stories, Yu earns the trust of the dragon by demonstrating perseverance and wisdom, such as solving complex environmental problems. So Yu tames floods and travels through flood-ravaged lands. Guys, we now know that the entire world of One Piece is flooded. And if Davy Jones's locker, the treasure, the dragon, the whale, whatever is on the bottom of the sea, right? That is quite literally flood-ravaged lands. But I think that I would be doing a disservice if I did not mention something related to Japanese mythology, and this time it's the story of Susanoo and Yamata no Orochi. In Shinto mythology, the storm god Susanoo faces trials to slay the 8-headed dragon Yamata no Orochi. This is something Oda's already been inspired by from Wano with the character Orochi who had this devil fruit. Inside the dragon's tail was a sacred treasure of Japan, a sword called Kusanagi no Tsurugi. So Susanoo acquired a great treasure inside of the immortal dragon. But the thing that I want to circle is that eventually Susanoo brews sake to intoxicate the dragon, which has me thinking about Binks sake. Also, I just want to point out to you that Kaido the dragon in Wano had a drinking problem. But yeah, I guess don't be shocked if we leave Elbaf with some of the giants fairy green. That part of the trial to prove yourself worthy is acquiring Binks booze, delivering it to the dragon which might actually be named Binks. I guess you gotta get it drunk for it to open its mouth and let you in. Perhaps also in combination with the idea that I had from the last video that similar to Laboon or similar to Nola the snake, music is important. The long story short is that there are ways to befriend the dragon if you discover them. Doing so will prove you worthy, and the dragon will give you its treasure. So I'm pretty sure that most of you remember the two sovereigns that the Sea Kings talked about in one of Roger's flashbacks. We're told the birthing is at hand, our sovereign will soon be born, and another in a distant sea. The whales are delighted in anticipation of the day the two sovereigns shall meet again. We have been waiting for so long, it is almost here, and surely all will go well this time. So first things first, now that we're in Elbaf and we've read the Harley text, this whole thing should be screaming at you, I am very important. There's a theme shared at the end of each of these poems, and they will never meet again, and they will never meet again. Surely this time they will meet. So the meeting of the two sovereigns is a big deal. And over the course of the last decade plus, people have attempted to speculate as to the identity of the second sovereign, given that we pretty much already know that Poseidon is the first one, the one who the Sea Kings say is soon to be born. People wondered if this could be Luffy, people wondered if this could be Momonosuke, but I would say that the general idea that the community had is that you have the ruler of the sea, Poseidon, and you have the ruler of the world above. And I'm not going to totally trash this, so keep it in your back pocket. But my question is why can't both of these sovereigns be sea creatures? Basically, I'm wondering if the second sovereign could be the great fish that is currently holding LAUGHTALE in the One Piece. But yeah, I would say that I'm struggling to find some sort of persuasive and definitive argument that this has to be the case. So if you want to just view it as an idea, what stops this from being the case? But I would say that the reason that I like this so much, especially in context of this theory, is it creates a sort of love story, potentially. So let's talk about Vanderdecken. So here's what we know and the legend. Vanderdecken was a captain of a pirate crew that existed hundreds of years ago, and they all rode on the Flying Dutchman. As an aside, the Flying Dutchman was also Davy Jones's ship from Disney's Pirates of the Caribbean. But then one dark and stormy night, Decken suddenly went mad and began killing off his crewmates by throwing them off the ship. He then invoked the wrath of God by defying him, and as punishment, he and his ship were cursed to wander the seas forever. And just after Brook finished telling this story, you have a really interesting panel of Vanderdecken the Ninth say, "Watatsumi, if you eat that ship, we can't get its treasure, so smash them." I just think that works incredibly well with a lot of the things that we've been speculating. Watatsumi also happens to be named after the dragon god of the sea. More on this later. But anyway, I understand that this is repetitive and potentially annoying, but just to be clear, the story of Jonah. Jonah defied the commands of God. And then during a storm summoned by God, Jonah's crew threw him out into the sea. I get that this is a total inversion, right? But it's very clear that Vanderdecken's story is based off of Jonah. And while the other parts of the story are not necessarily in line with Jonah, they are in line with Davy Jones. Or at least the version of Davy Jones that we have been speculating. In my opinion, it is pretty likely that Vanderdecken went crazy because he was transformed into a demon. But even if this isn't literally true, I think that you could see the possible parallels here if that is what happened to Davy Jones. I believe that both were cursed by God. I also find it to be interesting that Vanderdecken just seemed to know too much. It appears somehow, someway, Vanderdecken discovered the identity of Poseidon, and he passed this intel down to his descendants. But then we fast forward to the present story, and Vanderdecken the Ninth, as inherited Vanderdecken's will, searching for Poseidon, found Shirahoshi and was in love with her, or at least wanted her to marry him. But yeah, if you're still not convinced that this story relates to Davy Jones and also the people that seem to be following in Davy Jones's footsteps, just listen to Vanderdecken's song. Dead men tell no tales. Dead men have no desires. In this blackened nation where not even a crow flies, dead men's fingers have no need of jewels. The darkness hides even their regrets. Find it, the sunken treasure is mine for the taking. I'm the richest man in the world, Captain Vanderdecken. I honestly think that if you understand this song, you understand a substantial portion of what One Piece is about. I think that Blackbeard would agree with the message of this song. In contrast with the D, who smile before they die, this song is basically saying that dying holds no advantages. Dead men tell no tales, dead men have no desires. Dead men's fingers have no need for jewels, and the darkness hides their regrets. Essentially, there is no joy of any kind in death. Dying means losing everything of value. This is a song which champions immortality, and also acquiring the treasure to become king of the world. We've talked a lot about Disney's Pirates of the Caribbean, and the story of Davy Jones from this is very, very interesting, especially if you speculate that the power of Poseidon, ancient weapon Poseidon, is derivative of a dragon. If a dragon is guarding the treasure, right? Hypothetically, there were other dragons which existed in the past. I kind of think that this is a story of a king and a queen. Shirahoshi today possesses the spirit or the blood of the dragon. Look, I understand that this theory is wild, but in Pirates of the Caribbean, Davy Jones had a love story with the sea goddess Calypso. They made a deal. Davy felt he was betrayed by Calypso, and then ultimately conspired with other pirates to seal Calypso's body away, or soul away, into the body of a mortal woman. So look guys, there's a multitude of ways in which this story could work. If you think about like Chinese mythology relating to dragons, dragon kings, like the 4 dragon kings of the seas, occasionally interact with humans in ways that border on romantic. Also, it's very common for a dragon to have the ability to transform into a human or have a human form. And these stories often end up with the human ascending to divine status. So all I really want to speculate is that there's some sort of love story here involving the dragon that we think holds the One Piece. Either it fell in love with a human, which would explain Shirahoshi's bloodline, or it had an immortal dragon partner, which potentially was captured by the ancient kingdom, and they were able to insert its blood or its spirit into the lineage of fishmen. But either way, surely this time they will meet. But before we get there, the next thing that we need to tackle is, where exactly will we find this dragon? And why exactly does no one seem to know where it is? Because I have a pretty good idea. For those that were paying attention, probably you noticed that there was a bit of Vanderdecken's lore that we skipped over. Essentially, Vanderdecken in legend was cursed by God to wander the seafloor for all eternity. This is another thing which you could potentially relate to Disney's Pirates of the Caribbean. Davy Jones made a deal with the sea goddess Calypso to ferry souls to the afterlife. But as part of this deal, Davy Jones was not allowed to make landfall except for once every 10 years. So when this deal was made, there was this interval of once every 10 years could Davy Jones meet the person that he loved. But as a fun fact, I think that this mythology is probably, at least in some parts, related to the story of Odysseus from Greek mythology. Odysseus had a 10-year journey home. I also think that it's probably related to the story of Cain and Abel. After killing Abel, his brother, Cain is marked by God and condemned to wander the earth as a fugitive. All of this should obviously remind you of Zoe. We know that Zoe committed some sort of great crime in the past, and just the same as Vanderdecken, seems to have been cursed to wander the world, unable to defend itself for eternity. So look guys, Vanderdecken's story may be a legend, but given what we know about Zoe, it is entirely possible that the legend is true. Some kind of power exists that allows you to force people to wander the world. And I wonder if this also happened to the dragon. This is from chapter 604. Frankie is talking about deep sea currents. As we get a picture of this in the background, he says, and those currents are always connected somewhere. They don't just branch off and combine from west to east. They can go up and down, surfacing and submerging like a giant dragon. The sea currents flow all around the world, uninterrupted. Then it continues, I heard that the deep current flows very slowly near the ocean floor. If it were to carry you all the way to the bottom, you wouldn't see the light of day for 2,000 years. The name of the currents which lead you to Fishman Island are called the Serpent Currents or the Sea Snake Currents. They also have some relation to the Florian Triangle. But yeah, I suppose just look at the way that Oda illustrated the ocean currents. It's depicted like a dragon. It's at the very least a very cool idea that a dragon is responsible for the world's ocean currents. It doesn't branch, it goes in a kind of loop, like the dragon is wandering the seas for all eternity, cursed for some crime it committed. Why can nobody find LAUGHTALE? Well, it's for the same reason that people have a lot of difficulty finding the island of Zoe. A log post does not point towards Zoe. The only reliable way to find it is by having a Viver card of somebody who is currently living there. Also, for this theory to be true, you would just have to assume the same as Zoe, that there's some environmental obstacles which prevent you from reaching the dragon. In Zoe's case, the tides moved away from Zoe, while mist shrouded it. So if you didn't know what you were looking for, you would miss it. This theory might also explain exactly what the 4 road poneglyphs do. If this dragon travels in some kind of predetermined pattern, right, then you could think about tracking the dragon like a star chart. This is something that humanity grappled with for a long time. The stars in the sky move. And if you dedicate enough time and resources, eventually you can figure out how they move and predict where they will be. So what the 4 road poneglyphs could be doing is providing you with a sea chart, both where it's been, where it's at, and where it will be in the future. And I personally just love this relation to the stars because you have the celestial dragons, and all of the Gorosei are named after planets which look like stars in the sky and also move. They also happen to be guardians of a treasure of a different variety, in this case, Emu, king of the world. So yeah, basically I don't think that LAUGHTALE exists in one location. The expanse of this path is so large that you almost wouldn't be able to find the dragon by chance, not including all of the environmental hazards which probably accompany these sea currents. So I suppose if you assume this theory is true, all that really matters is where will the dragon be when the Straw Hats eventually find it? And my guess is somewhere near Fishman Island. Rook tells us that I heard that a deep current flows very slowly near the ocean floor. If it were to carry you all the way to the bottom, you wouldn't see the light of day for 2,000 years. So this would obviously be a current that would be a death sentence for most people, and anybody with a shred of common sense would avoid it. But I'm of the opinion that the dragon is currently traveling along one of these deep sea currents, and potentially has for the last several thousand years. So I really hope that you aren't getting tired because we have one more myth that we want to explain. This is one of the most famous stories from Japanese mythology, the story of the lost fish hook and/or the tide jewels. I've actually brought this story up before. I'm not entirely sure of the context, but I really think that this myth encapsulates a lot of One Piece. And it's another thing which might hit you harder if you watch the other video. The story begins with two gods or two brothers. Each brother has a sort of magical item or a specialty. One is a hunter and one is a fisherman. One day they decide to switch tools because they believe that they can do their brother's job better. You can think of it as being very similar to Dory and Rogi from Little Garden. Just a pointless game of pride that does not have a happy ending. So the hunter, Hori, takes his brother's fishhook and attempts to use it, but loses it in the sea. This leads to a big fight, and ultimately Hori is sort of cast into the sea, similar to Jonah, to retrieve the lost fishhook. And this adventure eventually leads him to the seafloor, where he discovers the dragon god of the sea and his daughter, in their palace called Ryugu Palace. The dragon's daughter is named Toyotama Hime, or otherwise Odo Hime. So obviously Hori came to retrieve the lost fishhook, but while here, he kind of lost himself in this dream world. He fell in love with the dragon god's daughter, and together they had a child. And it wasn't for some time until he remembered his task. So the dragon god of the sea helps him find the fishhook, and at the same time gives him what is called the tide jewels, known individually as the Kanju and the Manju. The Kanju is the tide ebbing jewel, and the Manju is the tide flowing jewel. Having both gives you command over the sea, just like the dragon god. So Hori returns to the surface with the fishhook and the tide jewels, but to settle the dispute that he had with his brother, Hori uses the jewels to manipulate the tides, submerging his brother in the sea until he submits. The brother then acknowledges Hori's superiority, and Hori's lineage is established as dominant, becoming the lineage of the imperial family of Japan. It is said that in the present day, the jewels are back in the possession of the dragon god of the sea. But there are several versions of the myth that mention that the tide jewels possess the ability of mind control, or perhaps the ability to command other beings. So this is a story of two brothers. One of the brothers betrayed the other. They ultimately fight to become king of the world. But if you recall that both brothers are supposed to be gods, I think that this parallels to the duality of Nika. There are two different Nikas that are destined to clash. So what happens to the brother that lost? Well guys, it seems that the story was not important enough to tell. The other brother is basically forgotten, although many think that he still exists somewhere in the sea, existing as a forgotten sea guardian. Anyway, there's a bunch of different ways that we could potentially parallel this with events in the story, both currently and in the past. But the main character that I want to parallel is Usopp and Hori, while his brother is Luffy. Just the same as Hori lost the fishhook in Water 7, Usopp lost the cash that was supposed to fix the Going Merry. This eventually led to a big fight between the two brothers, Luffy and Usopp, where they went their separate ways. Now let's pretend that Davy Jones is a character inspired by Usopp in Water 7. He also left Joy Boy's crew, and at some point in this adventure, he discovered Fishman Island and fell in love with the princess, Poseidon. The way that I like to imagine it in my mind is similar to the relationship between Usopp and Kaya. Davy Jones told Poseidon all of these fanciful tales. Eventually, they fell in love. I don't know exactly how it would work, but they could have also had a child, and this could be the lineage that led to Hody Jones. But it was here that Davy Jones acquired the power of the dragon god of the sea, or the tide jewels. In this case, it is the power of Poseidon. We already know in One Piece that the ancient weapons are feared for their ability to flood the world. The tide jewels are the ancient weapons. Just the same as you see with Vanderdecken, right? Vanderdecken's goal is to marry Shirahoshi so that he can use the power of Poseidon. This is potentially based off of something that actually happened. So the story of Davy Jones might go something like this. Davy Jones has a brother in Joy Boy. They don't actually have to be legitimate brothers. In the world of One Piece, you can share sake cups and become brothers. This is something that pirates do. Eventually, they had a falling out and went separate ways. Sometime along this adventure, Hody Jones fell in love with the mermaid princess Poseidon. However, after he was transformed into a demon, Poseidon betrayed him. And this works incredibly well with the Davy Jones from Disney's Pirates of the Caribbean. Davy Jones felt like he was betrayed by the sea goddess, the woman that he loved, ultimately conspiring against her and becoming a devil. So all of this could end up being a very creative way to explain the poneglyph of apology that Joy Boy left Poseidon. Davy Jones was transformed into a demon. Poseidon sided with Joy Boy, and Joy Boy made a promise to Poseidon to get Davy back because she loved him, which he was never able to do. So I hope that you guys can see the similarities and the differences between this and the story of the Lost Fishhook or the Tide Jewels. This is just how Oda parallels things. He tells the same story in a multitude of different ways. But if this is something close to the story of the second world, I think the next obvious thing to tackle is the first world. I think that the original gods of the One Piece world were dragons. However, similar to Prometheus, man stole fire from the gods. We know that Vegapunk's dream is to create this miniature sun called the Eternal Flame, and the closest that he has gotten is the Mother Flame. And we see the Mother Flame in Egghead, and it's literally this flame suspended in water. Basically, what I think happened is 3,000 years ago, man declared war against the dragons. They defeated what was the Poseidon of the time. They stole her fire and imprisoned her in a mortal body. And honestly, I think that this works really well with the dragon devil fruit that we actually have in the story currently. One of the interesting characteristics of this dragon is that the dragon can't actually fly. Instead, they summon clouds which they can climb. I like to view these clouds as dreams. So this original Poseidon had a lover, another dragon. The dragon that I currently want to call Binks, who guards the One Piece treasure. Pursuing revenge due to humanity's sins, this dragon becomes king of the world. And this is how we arrive at the mural that we found in Elbaf. The dragon in the mural is presiding over Treasure Tree Adam. Symbolically, the dragon has left the sea to rule over humanity because of the evil things that they had done. In my opinion, this is also the reason why Oda gave Monkey D. Dragon the name Dragon. Because Dragon, just like most every marine character that is relevant, and also the same as the dragon that we're actually talking about, is pursuing justice. But I feel like the moral of One Piece tends to be, justice is pretty subjective. And by enforcing your view of justice, you become the tyrant. But kind of like Icarus from Greek mythology, it flew too close to the sun. Just as Rox D. Zebek said recently, all gods will eventually fall. The world rose up against this tyrannical Kaido-like dragon that was lost in grief. Also related to all of this is my headcanon that the Eternal Flame creates a byproduct, which is literally Sky Cloud. Link in the description. This is also something that we potentially see in Egghead with the Mother Flame. The island of Egghead itself seems to be creating Sky Cloud. So the world that we're adventuring now is literally built atop of Sky Cloud, which covers the original first world, which is now akin to hell. But the end result of all of this is the entire world gets cast into darkness. Literally the entire sky covered in clouds, like an endless storm. So as you read the poem of the first world, it says, the earth god was enraged, and together with the serpent of infernal flames, shrouded the world in death and darkness. They would never meet again. But obviously for this theory to work with everything else that we said, then this dragon must have survived. So I like the thought that similar to Kaido, the dragon simply couldn't be killed. Instead, they defeated it by somehow possessing a power to command it. Bear in mind that this dragon was the destructive form of Nika, the version of Nika that conquers the world or becomes king of the world. So I'd like to relate this to Odin from Odin's flashback in Wano. The dragon was commanded or cursed to travel the world for eternity. Like Odin, it was made to be a fool or a spectacle, to travel around the world in a kind of dance. But keep in mind that this was before the world flooded, so this dance was mostly through the sky. At the very least, there's something powerfully symbolic about the idea that a former god was sort of shackled to destiny, forced to become a novelty to the people as it flew across the sky. This visual is also heavily related to a lot of Eastern dragon mythology. How many games have you played where there's just a dragon that's just casually flying across the sky the entire game? Or it could end up being a bit darker than this as well, like for instance, the dragon brought a storm with it as it did so it's just like this roaming cloud of sadness. But the idea is that this dragon is still traveling the very same path. It's just that now the world is flooded, so its path has become the sea currents. But anyway guys, I could speculate more. I think that you know that. But perhaps from here it gets a bit too speculative or convoluted, which might be rich given everything else that we've already said, but you know, it is what it is. I guess I just want to throw some questions at you. If the dragon was the former god of the world, then it would stand to reason that going into the second world, some people would still believe in the dragon as god. So some of them might be a bit frustrated if the dragon is just dancing through the sky and not actually doing anything. the same as the people of Wano felt about Odin. But if anybody pursued this truth, they would eventually stumble upon the facts of what had happened and realize that the dragon is enslaved. Its free will has been taken. So this adventure might inspire somebody to desire to free the dragon, which is symbolically exactly the same as we have been speculating about Davy Jones. Davy Jones was another Nika figure. Many people believed in Davy Jones as God. Joy Boy imprisoned Davy Jones inside of Davy Jones' locker to protect him, but also to protect the world from him. A character like Blackbeard wants to set him free, but the reality is that Davy Jones is a demon or a devil. So this would be akin to releasing the devil. All of this would be true with the dragon as well. Essentially, just the same as Oda likes to do, we are recreating the same story. It is playing out again, cyclically. Speaking of cyclical stories, right? Once again, I have bitten off more than I can chew. I had bigger plans for the end of this video. Essentially, we wanted to speculate that the dragon will be located near Fishman Island at the time that Luffy finds it, and then Emu Thors or uses their weapon, or somebody else uses their weapon to actually try to kill the dragon, which then sends it through the ground to the first world below. So you get a scene similar to the whales as they surface into the new world, but turned on its head, because the dragon is surfacing through the ground. This could also work as a parallel with the story of Jaya, where half of Jaya gets knocked up into the sky because of the knock-up stream. So Fishman Island is literally rendered in two, half of it falling into the flames of hell. And I mean, guys, I don't know exactly how this would work, but this could also tie into the prophecy that Luffy is responsible for the destruction of Fishman Island. But trying to sell this as a legit theory and not just a cool idea doesn't sit right with me, so we're gonna throw it in at the end. But yeah, guys, a million more things I could say. We didn't even touch on what Zoe's actual crime was, but there's not enough time in the day. And at this point, I feel fatigued, so I imagine that you might be as well. But as always, guys, whether you agree with nothing that I said or everything that I said, I hope that you enjoyed the video, and at the very least, it gave you something to think about. If you're interested, check out my book, The Booms, link is in the description. Like the video, subscribe, click the bell to be notified, join the squad, and as always, guys, have a wonderful day.